So good morning everyone. Good morning, Kapil. So yes. So we have done till essay 510. We've done till essay 510. We'll start with essay 520 and let's try to also complete essay 530. So 520 and 530, that is what our target for today is. I hope you are revising the standards, right? Revising the standards with questions, because it won't matter if you don't do the question. It won't until and unless you don't do the questions, solve them, the that realization will not happen. So depends upon your practice and also upon your revision, number of revision. All everything is dependent on that, on the standards only, because we are getting everything whatever we want to know, we are getting to know that in here, right? But you have to revise that just after the class and then after 2 3 days back again, so that you tend to retain what we have gone through in the class, else it will all go futile. So let's start with essay 520, analytical procedures. Objective here for the auditor, if you are aware about this analytical procedure already, I've told you a lot many times before as well, right? So as told earlier, in analytical procedure is like kind of what methodology, where suppose you are having last 5 year financial statement, and you are seeing operating cost of the company as 200 crore, then 220 crore, then 235 crore, then 268 crore, 291 crore. So this is like a trend that you are seeing, that if you see on an average over the period of 5 years, it has grown from 291 by 200 to the power, if I do 1 by 4, I'll get what? I'll get compounded average, CAGR, right? Compounded average growth rate. So I can predict that my next year or this year expense should be around 291 into this CAGR which I have computed. This CAGR which I have computed, or on an average, you can directly say what 91 by 200 is around 4.5%. So it should grow by around 4.5% in this current year. 291 into 4.5%, so it should be around that. That is kind of like analytical procedure, where you are predicting the information earlier, so that when you get to know about the actual, and suppose actual is 388 crores, so you'll get to know how come operating costs increase so much, whether there is huge expansion that has occurred during the year, huge expansion in number of branches, or have you went into complete digitalization, because of which your operating cost generally increases in initial year. When you go for digitalization in any industry, in any entity, your operating costs will generally increase because you are investing heavily on technologies. So later on you'll realize, you'll materialize the benefit later on in later years. However, in initial years you will tend to see that operating costs have increased. So any of this has happened, or what is the reason behind this? So we will go in detail when we already know comes aware about any sort of deviation from expected figure. So any deviation from the expected figure, how do we arrive at expected figure? Through analytical procedure, by structural modeling, by this kind of trend analysis, by ratio analysis. So all these are my methods in analytical procedure. This we have already gone through, right? I remember clearly mentioning you about the analytical procedure. Now what here we are going to do, here we are going to see how come the analytical procedure, where is it relevant, where is it not relevant, and how exactly to perform it, in which circumstances. So first of all, objective of auditor is to obtaining of the relevant and reliable audit evidence when using substantive analytical procedure. So they are saying relevant and reliable audit evidence, they are not saying sufficient appropriate audit evidence. So just remember this as well, that analytical procedure do not provide corroborative audit evidence, do not provide sufficient appropriate audit evidence on its own. They are just giving you an attentive area where you have to focus now and check accordingly in detail, that is perform test of details of transaction. So that is what analytical procedure is meant for, to give you an idea where to look in more detail, to give you focus area, to give you what focus area. So we can get an relevant and reliable audit evidence, but not sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Similarly, we design and perform analytical procedure near end of audit, so as to assist ourselves by conclusion. During the conclusion, what generally partners also do, if your partner is verifying the books of accounts or verifying your audit that you have done, he will not go through each and every process documentation that you have taken, right? He will simply check which procedure or which figures have changed substantially, which figures have remained constant, he will ignore kind of, and which figure have changed substantially or it's not following the trend or not following the ratios, he will go into those figures and ask you about that, right? So when reviewing the audit, when concluding the audit, you can say analytical procedures are very much reliable source of audit procedures that you can apply when concluding the audit opinion, when at the conclusion stage, at the review stage, review and conclusion stage. So that is what our objective of auditor here is. Now let's see what exactly is substantive analytical procedure is. SAP, substantive analytical procedure. So when you are designing and performing substantive analytical procedure, when you are designing and performing substantive analytical procedure, either alone or in combination with test of detail, then you have to see four things. You have to see four things. SRED. You have to see four things. First is suitability. Suitability, that means what? Whether analytical procedure is suitable or not under the given circumstances. Example I'll give you. Simply it depends upon assertion. It simply depends upon assertion. Now you all tell me, where do you think analytical procedure is more relevant? In class of transaction or it or in account balance level? Where do you think it is more relevant? In which assertion level? Is whether is it more relevant in class of transaction level or account balance level? Yeah. Are you getting my question? Analytical procedure, where do you think? I just give you a hint, right? I just give you the hint. Tell me quickly, where do you think is more relevant? Dhanlakshmi is saying account balance level. Why Dhanlakshmi?
The class of transaction.
Class of transaction, so mixed views.
Yeah.
Class of transaction or account balance? And if class of transaction, then why? And if account balance, then why? With reasoning, you should always give answer with reason.
So because it is suitable for large number of large volume of transactions.
It is suitable for large volume of transactions. So then account balance level pay, if I am saying you account balance level pay, example cash balance. Don't you think cash transaction could be a large volume of transaction happening throughout the year? Cash or example debtor. Similarly, if I have to here say what? Sales. So where do you think is more relevant? In the case of debtor or sales?
So data.
So now you are saying account balance level.
Yes.
Sorry, class of transaction इधर हो गया गलत हो गया. Sales here will be there and account balance will be debtor. It will be sales na. See, analytical procedure we are performing the ratio or analysis, but at a point of time, as at any given day, debtor could be 1 lakh or it could even be 1000 or it could be even be 10,000. If suppose example debtor pays off throughout the year, debtor has paid off. So cash debtor, it could vary from day to day. It doesn't need to be same in the same ratio throughout all the days, right? As on 31st March, it could be different as compared to other days. But however, sales throughout the period, it will be more or less tandem to the previous sales or the growth projections that we had. So sales throughout the period, we can be more suitable, we can apply analytical procedure more suitably to sales as compared to the balance sheet figures. If you could think in those lines, what I'm trying to say, it balance sheet figures will could be changed. It in 29th January or 29th March, it could be 1 lakh, then cash could be 10,000 in the case of 31st March. So it can vary, right? It may vary. However, sales throughout the year won't be varying. As such, you can predict more prediction can happen in class of transaction as compared to account balance. So that is what they are saying, determine the suitability of particular SAP. Suitability you have to determine for given assertions. So just now I tell you what, generally COT will be more suitable. Taking account of assessed ROMM, definitely you have to determine risk of material misstatement in each assertion level, and the test of detail for all these assertion, how much caring you are to do. But we apply ratio analysis to balance sheet items, yes, correct. But generally if I say, it will be more reliable as definitely you can apply analytical procedure in balance sheet item, we apply, right, we apply anyways. But as compared to few of the items in balance sheet which could be fluctuating in nature, see LCR, liquidity coverage ratio, or whatever coverage ratio that you follow, LCR or NSFR ratios, so these generally may be, so like LCR it could be 128%, recently I've been doing for as on for 2023 FY 2023, and similarly for FY 2022 it was around 168%. So it doesn't needs to be like a kind of trend you cannot predict in the case of balance sheet item, although yes, mota mati you can say that my data turnover ratio should be around this much, correct. My sales, or you can say asset turnover ratio, it could be around this much. But again, these are mixed ratios. These are sales upon data, these are sales upon data, these are mixed ratio, means one item is of profit and loss item and another item is of balance sheet item. Similarly, if you say balance sheet to balance sheet, then you can say debt to equity. Now debt to equity you can predict because these are more sticky in nature. These doesn't change like what I was trying to say, liquid asset change generally, cash, or you can say other liquid asset, right. So if they are more changing, then you cannot apply as such to more liquid assets. Or to reframe now, Dhanlakshmi, I can say that it is not applicable or suitable for liquid assets as compared to your balance sheet, other balance sheet figure, or as compared to your profit and loss figure, correct. ठीक है ना. Yes or no? Now, evaluating the reliability of data from which auditors expectation of recorded amounts or ratio is developed. Now generally what analytical procedure is, if I say analytical procedure, if I say, it's identifying plausible relationship, identifying plausible relationship, plausible, or you can say predictable relationship between financials financial item to non financial item, or financial item to financial item. Getting this? Financial item to financial item, example could be when you are comparing sales and debtors, so it should be tandem, debtor sales should be tandem. Similarly, when you are comparing employee expense to number of employees, getting this? So this number of employees is a non-financial item. However, employee expense is a financial item because it is appearing as a financial statement line item, na, FSLI. So analytical procedure is nothing but identifying this relationship, predictable relationship, plausible relationship amongst financial and non-financial, or amongst financial and financial items. So that is what they are saying, that the data that you are getting, so suppose example, I saw that during the last 3 years, number of employees was suppose 5891, and then it turned to 6500, and then it turned to 7500, 7500, 7580 suppose. So employee expense also, if I can see, is for around 102 cr. Then in this case, employee expense could be suppose 121 cr, and then here it would be 139 cr. So it is, you can see the relationship, you can calculate the expense per employee. So you can calculate expense per employee, and if you are getting a range of, suppose a common range between, it is arriving at 1 2 lakh or 12 lakh or anything sort of that figure, you are getting around 13, or a range you are getting, then you can definitely calculate the employee expense for the next year, right. So you can calculate the employee expense of the average 11 lakh into number of employees that I have during this year, current year, thereby predicting what information or what employee expense should be. So that is what they are saying, that the number of employees that you are getting, the source of this information, everything should be reliable. Data that you are obtaining for the purpose of your analytical procedure should be what? Reliable. should be reliable. Evaluating the reliability of data from which auditors expectation of recorded amounts or ratios is developed, taking account of what four things. So again they can ask you a separate question on reliability of data separately. Please pay attention. Separately they can ask you a question on reliability of data. 4 mark question has come already. I'm letting you know in advance, this has come already. And also what has come is SRED separately. So when SRED come, you don't have to write the 4 points of the reliability, but when they specifically ask about you the reliability part, then you have to also write how come you can derive the reliability of the data, right? So let's quickly go through one by one. First is source of the information available. So example, information will be more reliable when it is obtained from independent sources outside the entity as compared to internal sources within the entity, right? With this we already know that whatever information that we obtain, it is more reliable when we obtain it from independent sources outside the entity as compared to what sources we have within in our entity. So source, the source, whatever the source, it will make the data more reliable if the source is outside the entity, right? Independent source outside the entity. Similarly, comparability of the information available. It could so happen that suppose you must have gone through the beta, right? Beta in SFM. So beta of industry, beta of sugar industry, generally we get beta of sugar industry. So what do we do? If suppose I am Dhampur Sugars, I am Dhampur Sugar and I am in sugar industry, right? So what I'll do, I'll see the beta of sugar industry. If I have the beta of sugar industry, then I'll do what? Beta of sugar industry divided by debt to equity of 1 plus d by e, sorry, 1 plus d, debt to equity of sugar industry as a whole. sugar industry का क्या debt to equity है? So 1 plus d by e, and then I'll multiply by 1 plus d by e. Do you remember this calculation? Deleveraging and then again releveraging. So when I divide by 1 plus d by e, it is called as what? Deleveraging beta. And then when again multiply 1 plus d by e, this 1 plus d by e is what? Debt to equity of Dhampur Sugar, of entity specific. So I thereby I'm getting what? Beta of Dhampur Sugar from beta of sugar industry. So whatever data you have of the industry, it could be industry data. You have to tailor made your data according to your use, according to your use. That is what they are saying. Then it will be more reliable. So comparability of the information you have to see. Example, broad industry data may need to be supplemented to be comparable to that of an entity. So it may so happen that industry data may need to be tailor made according to your use, according to your satisfaction. Getting this, everyone? Yes or no? And then lastly, the other 2 points are nature and relevance of the information available. So what do you think? Quickly tell me. If I give you the budget, if I tell you that no, you have to achieve the target of 2 crore profit, 2 crore profit, this is the budget, you have to achieve this target, budget target. And if I tell you other option, that you go with the industry budget, you go in accordance with the industry budgets, or you go in accordance with what our capability is. So our capabilities is already current year is 1.5 cr, and around 10-25%, 10 to 20% we can increase. So that means 150 crore, say 180 crore we can go max. That means 150, say 165 crore or 180 crore. We can go max by 180 crore this year profitability. So 15 or 20 or 10% odd growth is expected. So which budget do you think will be more reliable? Will be more reliable? The one which I imposed on you about on 200 crore, or the one I told you could be more or less what our past trend is, right? Or what we expect it to be, 10 to 20%. Yeah, tell me quickly. What do you think will be more reliable? Which figure will be more reliable? Are everyone getting this or not? What I'm asking? Yeah, past trend,
10 to 20% वाला.
right? So 10 to 20% will be more reliable. It is not something which is imposed on you. It is not something which is unreasonable, unreliable, or you can say unfeasible, impossible, right? So something has to be feasible also, viable, right? And that is more reliable as compared to other imposed figures. And similarly, controls over the preparation of the information. So whatever information you are getting, number of employees or room rent or whatever information you are getting, that should be, there should be some controls on those information available, controls over the information. So I can simply say what? NSCP control, NSCP control. So and say nature and relevance of the information available, whatever nature of information that you have with yourself. So you will give the example of budget that I gave you, right? Then S for source of the information available. So source, again, it's very easy. You can say independent sources outside India, are outside entity, sorry, are more reliable as compared to internal sources within the entity. And then C for comparability. C for comparability of the information available. So I told you comparable information has to be there. That means if you are getting the industry data, then you have to make it tailor made to in the for the purpose of your entity, so as for comparison purpose, so that you can compare, so comparability of the data. And lastly, control over preparation of the information. So whatever information data you are getting, if there are enough internal controls imposed, then definitely those internal controls will place more reliability in our mind, right? In as an auditor, we'll get more reliability on those figures whatever we are getting, if there are already internal control implemented on those key points. So this was what reliability of the data, reliability. Then we will expect, right? So I told you we are generally doing what expectation based on past trends. We are then expecting a figure, right? We are expecting a figure, expectation of recorded amounts or ratios, and evaluate whether expectation is sufficiently precise, that is exact, to identify misstatements that may cause financial statement to be materially misstated. So I told you one example where 288 crore should be cost to income ratio, also should be cost operating cost, but it went to 398 crore. 398 crore, right? So expectation was 288, it went to 398, 110 crore increase. So what exactly was the reason? Is there any misstatement, or is there any proper justification that you have to go through? So that was only the thing which I was trying to tell you from the starting, that we are expecting, we have to derive upon a certain expectation and then compare actual results. And if there is huge deviation, then we further delve into this audit procedure perform, and more detailed procedures are performed. But if it motamati same, then we okay, kind of move forward. So lastly, we have to find now what, after expectation we will find the difference of unrecorded, difference of recorded amounts from the expected values. So recorded versus expected, what is the difference? Getting this? That is acceptable without further investigation. Any doubt till here? Both the question are very very important for SA 520. Both the questions are very very important. They can ask you when designing and performing substantive analytical procedure either alone or in a combination with test of detail, what shall auditor do in the case of performing analytical procedure? What audit procedure auditor shall do? Then you have to write SRED. They can also directly tell you what, reliability of data, reliability of data from which auditor's expectation of recorded amounts or ratios is developed. So what all points you have to take in account for checking the reliability of the data in accordance with SA 520? They'll directly ask you. So those 4 points are also very very important. Just let me know if you have gone through this again, and then we'll move forward. Or in case you have any doubt, then simply straight away right now ask. So now next, let's come to suitability of particular analytical procedure for given assertions. So suitability we were seeing, right? Now we have saw what, reliability. Reliability we have seen, and those under those 4 points also we have seen, right? Source of information available, nature and nature of the information available, right? And then S for source of information available, C for comparability of the information available, and controls over the information that is available. Controls over the information that is available, and within that all the example also you should code. If at all answer comes again for 4 marks in the exam, you have to write the examples. So source of information mein you can write that only, ki internal sources wala come reliable as compared to external sources. Similarly, for your nature of information available mein you can write about your budget example, which is more reliable. Then comparability of the information you will have to write the example of broad industry data, has to be tailor made to be comparable with the entity data, right? And control you will give the details about the controls that are there over your information. Whatever is available will be more reliable if the controls are implemented. Now suitability wise, if we see now the first point which was there, suitability, if we go into that part, then substantive analytical procedure are generally more applicable to large volume of data, as rightly or correctly said by Sony, right? So Sony told us right in the beginning itself that generally it will tend to be applied or suitable more in the case of large volume of data. Why not small? Because small volume of data we can apply TOD na, we can get more corroborative audit evidence or substantive appropriate substantive sai we would be getting sai from performing TOD. But analytical procedure, if you are performing, it should be performed on those sets of data where we cannot perform TOD alone. TOD alone cannot happen. and therefore we should first try to perform substantive analytical procedure, and thereby getting to know how much detailed TOD we have to perform after that, or whether we have to perform or not, right? So substantive analytical procedure generally apply to large volume of data. Getting the logic or not, everyone? So it should apply to large volume of data, large volume of transaction that tend to be predictable over time. Yeah, definitely it has to be predictable over time. If not, you can then predict based on last few years data. Now, in some cases, even unsophisticated predictive model. Unsophisticated means very simple model. Example: dividend discount model versus discount cash flow model. Which dimension model do you think is very easy? Unsophisticated DDM, dividend discount model, DDM, right? So it could sometimes so happen that DDM is more effective than DCF. Generally, it won't happen, but sometimes yes, it can happen, and it may be more effective as analytical procedure. Example they are giving that just a so simple figure that you can just relate employee expense with number of employees. If number of employees is increased by 20%, your employee expense should also increase by motamati 15 to 25% range. Yes or no? So if the number of employees are increasing by 20%, the number or the total employee expense can also be predicted. Now this is a very basic model, very unsophisticated, easy model, but can be a very effective analytical procedure. So that is what they're saying, and this example they've also asked in the form of question in May 2019. May 2019 के already question भी आ गए इस पे. May 2019 question, first part you will see, um, see below. May 19 का क्वेश्चन किधर है? अच्छा, May 19 का क्वेश्चन है ये. You have been appointed as an auditor of Mrs. Excellent Hotels Limited. As a senior partner, you want to use analytical procedure in respect of room rentals as well as payroll expenses. Now, what do you think? How can we calculate? Just try to use your brain and tell me how can we calculate the expected room rental expense, expected room rental as well as payroll expense. So payroll expense just now we thought. So based on number of employees, you can figure that out. Now try to also think on the similar lines. How can we exactly calculate room rentals? Room rentals means what? Suppose you are a hotel, right? होटल है ना अपन, एक्सेलेंट होटल लिमिटेड. We are a hotel. We want to predict how much revenue have we generated from room rentals. बोलो फटाफट, सोचो एंड बोलो. Number of rooms booked, then suppose in a hotel there are 1000 rooms. Charge per room. Okay. More, whatever you are thinking, spill it out. फटाफट. You are saying number of rooms booked into charge per room.
It also include inflation rate, inflation.
Inflation will can be applied over charge per room. So if it was 1000 per
Okay.
room last year, you can apply inflation 1.06 into 1000. Guest register, you can use guest register. But then you might have to do what in detail and
Occupancy.
occupancy, correct. So you might have to do a detailed analysis. So 1000 room if you see, then you might have to qualify, first of all quantify into Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, because not all seasons have the same occupancy rate. Not all seasons have the same occupancy in the hotels, right? Everyone must be aware. CCTV, you won't have then, instead of doing that, Lakshmi, can't you directly do TOD? If you start doing CCTV, then the amount of time it will take is more or less similar to if you would have performed TOD, test of details. We are trying to expect a turnover here right now. So CCTV मत देखते रहो how many guests has arrived. So by Q1, Q2, Q3 quarterly analysis, first of all we will bifurcate our rooms, number of room, 1000 rooms. Suppose 300 rooms are two bedrooms, 100 are for four people, and rest 600 are for suppose single bedrooms, single bedroom, one people. Now you can again do bifurcation, then you can apply your occupancy rate separately, occupancy rate, and then you will get to know exactly how much charge. Then you can apply what charge, and occupancy rate will be different for different quarters, different for different quarters, right? Even charge could be same for different, charge per room could be different for different quarters, it cannot be same. So thereby bifurcating into number of quarter, into occupancy, into number of room, different types of room, you are getting a more detailed answer, right? Getting this, a more detailed, or you can say a more precise exact answer, as expectation would be more precise. So that is what they're saying. In case of room rental, income of hotel, different types of analytical procedure provide different level of assurance. So this is a type of assurance level only, right? This is a type of analytical procedure only which can provide you a different level as compared to what you were suggesting, what you were all suggesting. Then analytical procedure involving prediction of total rental income in case of hotel, taking the room tariff rates, right? Tariff rate, charge per room, what you were saying, number of rooms, occupancy rates into consideration, can provide persuasive audit evidence and may eliminate the need for further verification. So if suppose mota mati your expense, expected expectation, or sorry, expected revenue from room rental, it is coming out to 201 cr, or whatever be your case, one whatever be the case in your case of hotel. So it is it coming room rental at 201 cr, and your actual expense that is shown in the profit and loss account, it is also around 210 cr. Then mota mati that much deviation is available, okay fine, it will work for us, and we don't have to go into much detail, because anyway this 201 is expected, right? This is not actual. Then this actual is coming close to expected, then we won't apply a much detailed audit procedure later. इन्वेस्टिगेट नहीं करना है, यस नहीं करना है इन्वेस्टिगेट सागर, if the deviation is not exceeding our range, our tolerable rate of deviation has to be calculated. What deviation you can calculate, or what deviation, what rate of deviation you can tolerate. If it is exceeding, then you will have to investigate further. We will come on to that later, Sagar, just after this. So what we were trying to say is different types of analytical procedure provide different level of assurance. For example, prediction of total room rental divided into apartment, taking rental rates, number of apartment, vacancy rates, right? These all provide persuasive audit evidence and eliminate the need for further verification. In contrast, calculation and comparison of gross margin percentage as means of confirming revenue figure may provide less persuasive audit evidence, but may provide useful corroboration if used in combination with other audit procedures. So they are now talking about margin figure, margin. If you want to calculate about comparison of the gross margin percentage, then you have to confirm revenue figure may provide less persuasive audit evidence. Because gross margin, you will also have to focus on volume of activity. Volume of activity will also be your key focus. If volume increase, generally margin might decrease, because you have to sustain the profitability. Overall absolute terms of profitability have to be more or less in tandem. Now they are also saying that determination of suitability, again suitability already we are doing, right? So is influenced by the nature of assertion as well, and auditor's assessment of ROM. They are saying that controls over sales order processing are weak, then the auditor may place more reliance on test of details rather than substantive analytical procedure for assertion related to receivables. So they are saying that if the sales order process is very weak, that is not, yeah. So what I was saying, that sales may be considered more reliable, or sorry, data's calculation will be more considered more reliable when there are proper controls. So it would be suitable when the controls are there over the related financial items. So for sales, for data, the related financial item are sales, right, or collection. If there are not proper controls implemented, then definitely you cannot simply brag upon that yes, substantive analytical procedure can be performed. And lastly, SAP may be considered suitable when TOD are performed on same assertion. When TOD are performed on same assertion. So example, they are saying that audit evidence regarding valuation assertion for accounts receivable balances, auditor may apply analytical procedure to aging of customers account in addition to performing TOD on subsequent cash receipts. So they are saying with respect to debtors, you should apply the analytical procedure to data related figures only. On the kind of same assertions only you should go for. So for debtors, we will go for aging analysis. That is up to 30 days. How many debtors are there? Then due for more than 30 days. 30 to 60 days, 60 to 90 days, 90 to 180 days, 180 to 365 days, more than 1 year, more than 5 year. So that could be what your more or less similar item on the similar lines. Now, lastly, we'll come to investigating results of analytical procedures. Investigating results of analytical procedures. So, as we came to know that we have to expect a figure, right? Third step was what? To derive on an expectation. Expectation we have to derive on. So, if analytical procedure performed, identify any fluctuation from expectations or relationships that are inconsistent. That means relationship are not exactly turning out to be as what we thought of, right? So employee expenses versus number of employees, what the relationship what we thought has now exactly turned out to be the same. Similarly, the relationship between sales and data has not turned out to be the same. Identify fluctuation relationship that are inconsistent with other relevant information or with other expected information, more you can say, or that differ from expected values, right, by a significant amount. Then auditor shall investigate those differences by inquiring, right? First of all, you have to inquire with the management that why there is such a big deviation as compared to the expectation. There is so many deviations. And then secondly, you have to perform other audit procedure as necessary in the circumstances. So what do you mean by other audit procedure, sir? Here, what is other audit procedure? How do we perform or how do we exactly investigate? By performing other audit procedure. Now we have found a deviation. So other audit procedure will be relating to what may arise when, for example, they are giving management is not able to provide any sort of explanation. So first of all, we inquired with the management, right? And management, we seek additional information available from them, if at all there is any additional information, why electricity expenses drastically increased, why telephone expenses drastically increased or decreased, whatever be the case. So they will simply tell the telephone expense decreased substantially because of coming out of Geo during that year. Geo was providing free of cost services. So we kind of shifted on that and thereby decreased our telephone expense. Similarly, lawyer related expense increased because of increased litigation, pending litigations during the year. So management's inquiry करना is very very important. Inquiring with the management will let you or will help you go into detail about the financials. Similarly, if management is also not providing you or is not able to provide you with relevant assertions or with relevant explanation, then you can do what? Perform another or other audit procedure. Other audit procedure together with audit evidence obtain relevant response is not considered appropriate. That means what? If the relevant response which the management has given to us on the inquiry, right? So I told you inquiry. Do you remember methods to obtain audit evidence? Inquiry was one of the point inquiry. And I told you if at all they want to ask a separate 4 mark question, they can ask you in inquiry. Inquiry could be formal, it could be informal, it could be oral, it could be written, right? Inquiry could be within the entity, inquiry could be outside the entity. However, more important point is to evaluate the response that we receive from the inquiry, response that you receive from the inquiry. And for that matter, they are saying again, management is unable to provide an explanation or the explanation together with audit evidence obtained relevant to management response is not considered adequate. Go through this question and then we'll start with essay 530. I hope essay 520 is more or less important and is also done by us. This is important. Investigation results of analytical procedure. November 2018, they have asked one question on this. So Sagar, did you get your answer? Did you get your answer here? See, when we will do investigation, if they differ from expected value by a significant amount. Now you have to determine what according to you is a significant amount. What according to you is a tolerable rate of deviation. That is a rate of deviation which can be tolerated by you. You have to determine that. If it is exceeding that, then you have to further investigate. Just quickly go through entirely and then we'll start with essay 530. So then, shall we start with essay 530 then? Audit sampling. So basics you already know, right? So फटाफट से यहाँ तक एक बार read मारो. Quickly read this. What do you mean by sampling? What do you mean by population? What do you mean by sampling unit? So population is 100% of the items. If you're taking 100% of the items, then it is population. If you're selecting few items out of them, then that is sampling units. What do we do? Why do we do sampling? Why do we do sampling? We do sampling in order to arrive at an opinion by performing less than 100% audit procedures. So by performing procedures on less than 100% of items, you can say by performing audit procedures on less than 100% of items, We are actually trying to give opinion on 100% of items. Getting this? That is why we are doing audit sampling. We are trying to give opinion on 100% of items by performing audit procedure on less than 100% of items. Just go through till here. It is very simple. If you have any doubt, quickly say. Yes, done. So we'll go through now statistical and non-statistical sampling. These are two types of sample, you can say. Types of sampling. So what do you mean by statistical sampling and what do you mean by non-statistical sampling? It's very simple. Statistical sampling is based on probability theory, is based scientific and is purely random in nature. Random means what? Have you ever applied the formula equals to rand in Excel or in even in Word? So rand, if you type rand and in open and close brackets, then they will definitely directly give you what? Some random text or random numbers in the case of Excel. So you will see that random selection of sample items can happen. You what? Random selection of weapons. So rand function is always used in Excel as well, in any formula that you want to calculate, or when we do what? Predictive modeling mein we use rand function. Then these are what? Random selection. It is not something which is biased, which is not something which is non-objective or biased. So random selection, it is based on use of probability theory. So since it is random, don't you think the probability theory is very much appropriate? Yes sir, it is very much appropriate. So don't you think it is a more scientific way? Yes, it is a very more scientific way. And don't you think it should have a wide application therefore? So yes sir, that should have a wide application as compared to non-statistical sampling, because non-statistical sampling is more or less biased, judgmental, or simple, you can say simple, and that is why it is more in operation as compared to statistical, because statistical is more scientific, use of probability theory, random, and has wide application. However, non-statistical is easy to use, judgmental basis pe. It's not that objective, it's biased, right? It could be biased. It should not happen that it is biased, but it could be biased. So that is what they are saying, a sampling approach that does not have characteristics of random selection, that does not have used the probability theory. Now that is considered as what? Non-statistical sampling. So it is generally based on personal experience, knowledge, and simplicity in operation was in common application for many years. That is what your two types of sampling, statistical sampling and non-statistical sampling. See the May 17 question. See it. Now come to meaning of sampling risk. So what do you mean by audit risk? Do you remember audit risk? Quickly tell me, what do you mean by audit risk? Bolo bolo bolo.
Inappropriate audit opinion.
Risk of providing inappropriate audit opinion, correct, right? So risk of providing inappropriate audit opinion is audit risk. Similarly, sampling risk is also a risk where you derive an opinion based on sample. However, if you would have computed or checked 100% of the items in the financial statement, then you would have based your opinion on certain different lines, that your opinion would be different. Had you performed entire 100% of the audit on 100% of the items, then your opinion would have been different as compared to the sampling that you have done. So the opinion that I'm deriving based on sampling should be same as what I would have got the result if I would have queried the entire audit process on 100% of the items. So that is what they are saying, the risk factor that kept in mind while applying sampling techniques. This I asked in May 2010. So what do you mean by sampling risk? That the auditor's conclusion based on a sample may be different. So conclusion is different. When you perform the sampling, you arrived at a conclusion. Now you are thinking that okay, conclusion can be different if different from the conclusion if entire population were subject to same audit procedure. If 100% of the items were subjected to same audit procedure, and if you are arriving at a difference of opinion, then definitely it should be done again by you. These are the sampling risk sampling risk. Because of the sample, you could arrive at a different opinion. So it is more or less tandem with audit risk only, right? Similar on the same line, audit risk. Now sampling risk can lead to two types of erroneous conclusion. This is important. two types of erroneous conclusion. One is error in effectiveness and the other is error in efficiency. So first of all, tell me the difference between effectiveness and efficiency. Fatafat. Huh? Anyone?
Sir, efficiency is related to employees like personals.
Then effectiveness.
Don't know about it.
What do you mean by effectiveness versus efficiency in general terms? If you could relate to general, if you could relate to anyone. काम अच्छा है is effective. So you are saying it good work done. The work is good, then it is effective. And if we are able to perform the work on time, then that is efficiency. That is what Kapil is saying, and that is more or less correct. If suppose I give you an example, that let's say after audit you try to complete the first revision of SFM in 10 days. You set your targets of 10 days SFM revision, or suppose 15 days audit revision. You set the target of 15 days audit revision or 10 days say SFM. Now you are able to complete your entire revision in 11 days, not in 10 days suppose, or even in 10 days. Then you are said to be effective. Then you are said to be effective, that yes, you were able to complete 100% of your objective. However, suppose you were able to finish off your entire SFM revision in 9 days only, then you will not only be called effective as well as efficient also. And however, if you were not able to completely do the entire SFM revision as the way you would have done if you would have given 10-11 days, then you were not effective, rather efficient. You are saying that I have completed, but you have left the topics in between, not the kind of revision that you wanted or you seeked for. So in that case you would be efficient but not effective. Effectiveness is when you achieved 100% of your objective, and efficiency when I am achieving those objectives, or even if not completely achieving those objectives, but I'm utilizing my least resources. So efficiency is directly related to what? Input output ratio. Input output ratio, the output that I'm getting and how much input that I fed in for that particular output. Getting this? So input output ratio should be minimum. That means output should increase. Output should increase and input should decrease, right? Yes or no? So denominator should increase and numerator should decrease. That means input output ratio should be least for efficiency to be high. Similarly, effectiveness generally relates to what you are able to achieve 100% of the item, or you were able to give your opinion accordingly based on what you thought of. So now let tell me the difference I told you. Now tell me that suppose you thought that test of controls have been performed and you thought that controls are effective, that you thought what, that yes fine, the controls are very much effective. Now when later on you started performing further audit procedure, when you started doing test of details of transaction, then you started finding out material misstatements. Then you started finding out what? Material misstatements. And you thought that this material misstatement did not used to exist that time. However, it is been there for long. And this misstatement, the fact that these are material misstatements, what do you think will be impacted by the auditor, impacted of the auditor? Will the effectiveness will be impacted or efficiency will be impacted? Then Lakshmi is saying effectiveness. Yes, others? Nikita is also saying effectiveness. Why? Because I am not able to exactly do the audit. Na material misstatement hai, and I am saying that no material misstatements are there. I am saying that controls are effective, but the controls are not effective. So that is ineffective, or you can say in effect not letting you to complete your entire audit. Your audit is being done, but that is not effective. That is not effective, right? The controls were not there, but you said controls are there. Were so many material misstatement, but you said no material misstatement. Then how come that audit is effective, right? You have not achieved your 100% of the objective. Now, similar on the same line, you saw that test of controls are very, very Like you performed the test of controls and you found that there are so many failure in the controls, and therefore you saw that test of controls are subject to certain assessment, that controls are not at all effective. However, when you later on started performing test of details of transaction, you find that material misstatement does not exist, or test of controls are effective. You find that test of controls are then effective. Then in this case, what will be hampered, effectiveness or efficiency? Think and tell think and tell think 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 If suppose I found so many control deficiency in beginning, and then I started performing further audit procedure, and then later on after like performing during performance, I got to know that no, efficient or if, what was I saying, this test of control controls are not that ineffective. That means controls are motamati effective. In the initial time I used to think that controls are ineffective, because at that time I kind of had those sort of experience where I am picking up those samples. But controls are motamati effective. So what do you think is more relevant here? What is more hampered, effectiveness or efficiency? Bolo bolo, efficiency. Then Lakshmi is saying efficiency. Efficiency, Pooja. Yes, Pooja, why? Bolo, why? Why do you think
Because sir, in actually controls are effective. Then there's the issue of the efficiency only.
so? You could frame it like that controls were effective, but you initially found out that controls are not effective. So thereby you increased your further audit procedure, right? Thereby you invested a lot of input, resources, time. So the input involved is now more as compared to the output, which is fixed. Output is effective, controls are effective, but initially you thought that controls were ineffective, and therefore you invested much more time. You performed further audit procedure to much detailed extent. You invested your resources much more, and thereby affecting your efficiency. Right now you won't be able to complete your audit in time, which you would have committed, right? So this have led you to increase your further audit procedure. These have led you to increase your sampling size, and thereby reducing your time to complete the audit, or thereby affecting your efficiency. Now again tell me, if you would have understood where effectiveness is hampered and where efficiency is hampered, now tell me in under which of the two circumstances, what is more relevant circumstances as an auditor? What do you think for you will be more relevant circumstances? Effectiveness achieve honi chahiye ya efficiency?
Efficiency, sir.
For why? Then again, why?
Sir, effectiveness means even though in sampling we does not मतलब हम पूरे वैसे भी सैम्पलिंग में भी हम कुछ सैंपल ही लेके मतलब ऑडिट ओपिनियन अपना कंक्लूड करते हैं और एफिशिएंसी में अपना मतलब प्रोसेस बढ़ जाएगा ना फिर ऑडिट वर्क वुड इंक्रीज ना.
But suppose your effectiveness is hampered and your efficiency is hampered. In one case, your effectiveness is hampered, and the second case, your efficiency is hampered. By which hamperedness you are more concerned with effectiveness hampered or with efficiency hampered? Are you concerned with which?
सर
दोनों
आई
भी
थिंक
सही धनलक्ष्मी.
एफिशिएंसी ओनली.
हाँ,
आई थिंक एफिशिएंसी ओनली.
टाइम से भी कंप्लीट होना चाहिए, एंड एट द सेम टाइम ऑडिट बराबर भी तो होना चाहिए. As an auditor you would be impacted more by the effectiveness na. Audit opinion should be right. Audit opinion. If you are giving a wrong opinion, then how come it is a perfect audit? Audit is not proper only then. If even if you are investing a more time, but audit is proper, your opinion is correct. At least in the second circumstances your opinion is correct, even though you have given a bit more time. Doesn't matter, you have given a bit more resources, a bit more inputs, but ultimately your opinion should be right. Yes or no? That is the exact main audit risk. Don't forget the main risk. The main risk is what? Audit risk. In that we understood ROMM, in that we understood inherent risk, control risk, detection risk, and this now sampling risk. So sampling risk is also that the risk that we should not give inappropriate audit opinion. And for us to avoid the sampling risk, we should focus on the effectiveness, the first circumstances where we thought that test of controls are effective, but in effect they were not effective. or we thought that material misstatements are not there, but in effect they were there. In effect they were there. Everyone getting this? ठीक है सागर? Satisfied or not? Just give it a reading, and give it a reading to non-sampling risk also. Non-sampling risk is any risk which is other than sampling risk. So it could be because of human element involved. It could be because of inappropriate audit procedure that you perform, misinterpretation that you carry out, failure to recognize any misstatement or deviation. So it could be any sort of risk which is other than sampling risk. So go through this also. Then we'll start with meaning of stratification. So now come to stratification. Meaning of stratification. Now stratification is very simple. You divide the entire population. You divide the entire population of items into different zones. So few transaction would be falling from suppose 1 to 25,000, then from 25,000 to 1 lakh, and then 1 lakh to 10 lakhs, 10 lakh to 50 lakhs, and then 50 lakhs to 1 cr. And if at all there is a transaction which is more than 1 cr, then you will select all those transactions. So I will be dividing all these transactions and grouping them. So few transaction would fall here, most of the transaction may be falling here, and few will be here, few will be here, few will be here, and few would fall here, and lastly very few would fall in last categories, right? So now on all the number of items that have fallen in each category, you will apply sampling. So here you will apply sampling, say 5% of the item. Here you will apply sampling, say 10% of the item. Here you will apply sampling, say 20% of the item. Here you will apply, say, sampling 30% of the item. Here you will apply sampling, say 50% of the item. And for more than 100 CR wale, 100% of the items you will select. That means what, whatever population this was having in the range of more than 1 crore, you will check each and every item. Each and every item. Similarly, the transaction ranging between 50 lakh to 1 CR. So all the population that you have come out in this particular range, you will select 50% of the items, 50% of these items. So all this bifurcation na category, it is called as what? Strata. It is called as what? Strata. So each stratum, from each stratum we apply a percentage and derive out how much sampling we have to carry out. How much sampling we have to carry out. So I hope I am making sense. This is very much clear. It is kind of what they are saying, that stratification is the process of dividing a population. You have divided a population, entire 100% of the population, you have divided into subpopulation, into subcategories, of which is a group of sampling units which have similar characteristics, often monetary value. And then from each group, so divided, now this each group is called as what? Strata. From each of this stratum, you will then carry out a separate population analysis and carry out a separate sampling in each of the other groups. Example they have given is entire expense voucher may be divided into 1 lakh, 25,000 to 1 lakh, and below 25,000. And then they say that 1 lakh and above wale ko 100% checking karo. Then 50% checking should be done from 25,000 to 1 lakh wale jo hai, and less than 25,000 wale items ko you do the checking of 25% of those items. The reason being what? The reason being the major amounts which is carrying huge exposure of the entity, right? It should be thoroughly checked. So wherever the entity has huge exposure in any sort of these transactions, entity should check accordingly. That is what is the reason behind the stratified sampling, is that for a highly diversified population, weight should be allocated to reflect these circumstances. We allocated the weight, na? So for 1 lakh, above 1 lakh, we weight, the allocated weight is 100%. Here it is 50%, and here it is 25%, right? So allocation of weight should be done to reflect the differences, that there are the difference. You cannot simply pick up the sample, pick up the population and do the sampling. 20% sampling you did. What if 1 crore wale se upar wale transaction do not come in your sampling, do not come into your checking? This could happen, right? So that is why we give weights accordingly based on the value of transaction that we have, monetary value, and that is called as what? Stratified sampling. Just go through this again. and see the question. This attempt, this question has came for the first time. See this question. Easy peasy. Yes. So everything has to be read, everything has to be understood, and accordingly then you will be able to perform, right? So this was a new question, that is all. Everyone is saying new questions were there in this paper, new questions were there. So don't you think this is on the same line what we have gone through? From the above mentioned group, CAT directed to pick up different percentage of items for examination from each of the group. One of the team member wants to use some other technique of sampling for the above purpose. As the concept of stratification is not clear to him, you are required to explain the concept of stratification. एक्सप्लेन कर देना उसको. Then tolerable rate of deviation and tolerable misstatement. So I just now I told you what tolerable rate of deviation. So because of this, suppose sampling, suppose you are expecting a deviation or expecting certain results, so you can, but then obviously expect also a deviation also. So suppose for you a tolerable rate of deviation is 5%. Then if the deviation exceeds this, then you might have to increase the sampling. If the deviation exceeds this, then you might have to increase the sampling. Similarly, tolerable misstatement is nothing but similar to performance motility. Do you remember performance motility, where we set motility at a level below the total motility to account for the non-sampled units, or to account for the units which are not examined by the auditor. In aggregate it should not exceed the total motility. In effect you should what say, that you can say that in effect the misstatements that we have identified and plus the misstatement which we have not identified because we have not performed the audit procedures on them, it should not exceed the total motility. Do you remember the concept of performance motility? The same concept you can see here, tolerable misstatement and the tolerable rate of deviation. Just go through this again, you'll tend to know. And then we'll start with sampling design, size, selection of items, performing audit procedure, and lastly evaluating results. Now come to sample design, size, and selection of items for testing. So when are you designing, when you're designing an audit sample, shouldn't you consider the purpose of the audit, right? The procedure that you are performing, the characteristics of the audit, the population from which you are deriving the sample. So based on that, your design of the audit sample will happen, right? Designing sample design will be depending upon the characteristics of the sample, characteristics of the total, sorry, characteristics of not the sample but characteristics of total population, purpose of the audit, and then you will be able to design your sampling properly. Similarly, if you want to say sample size, it should be sufficient sample size such that it reduces sampling risk to an acceptably low level. So sampling risk, just now we've gone through, right? Remember that there are material misstatement, but in effect, we found that controls are effective, but in effect they are not. Or we found that there are no material misstatement, but in effect they are. This would lead to hampering of effectiveness, right? Similarly, one more sampling risk clause is with respect to hampering of efficiency, where we found that controls are not effective, but in effect they are effective. And similarly, where we found that there are many material misstatement, but ineffective they were not material misstatements. So both will affect my what, sampling risk, and sampling risk should be brought down to the lowest acceptable level. Then the auditor shall also select items for sample in such a way that each sampling unit in the population has a chance of selection. So selection should happen how? Selection should be such that everyone has equal chance of getting being selected. Every one of us has equal chance of being getting selected. So selection is based on equal probability theory. Size is based on reducing the sampling risk to an acceptable low level, and design is based upon what, purpose and characteristics of the audit. Why are we getting into more depth, more detail? We are trying to link with each and every part, right? Design is related, size, similarly size is related to what, and selection is related to probability theory. Everyone should get equal chance of getting being selected. So similarly you should also link the same, because that might ask, they might ask you even in the form of MCQ as well, right? So you can just write here sample design में characteristics of audit, population, similarly purpose of audit, Then size, probability theory. Everyone should have equal chance of being getting selected. And selection is what? Selection, how should you select? Sorry, selection बताइए. Size should be such that size should be such that reduces sampling risk to acceptably low level, right? And selection should be such that all are having equal chance of being getting selected. Now give it this as a homework. Performing audit procedure is your homework. Please do give the read. Come to here evaluating results of audit sampling.
So, can you please explain again the tolerable rate of deviation?
Tolerable rate of deviation is something that, suppose example I'll give you. I'll give you suppose example P2P process. Do you remember P2P process? Procure to pay process, right? So there we started with what, doing sampling, and we, I told you it's kind of a mini audit only. Whenever we are doing performing test of control testing is happening, it's kind of a mini audit where we try to get all the audit evidences and check accordingly whether the controls were implemented effectively or not. That is, controls are operating effectively or not. So in the case of P2P, suppose example, there is the PO should reflect the purchase requisition figures, auto populate. There should not be much deviation, right? So suppose we obtain all the PO, and how will we obtain PO? We will just get the screenshot of the PO. So PO is automatically filled. So we'll get the screenshot of all the POs. We'll obtain that, and we'll check with the purchase requisition and purchase order. And if the any deviation is there, any deviation in the sense of or any of the control that I told you with respect to what, suppose 3 quotation should be there, minimum quotation should be accepted. Similarly, PO amount should be equal to PR amount in terms of quantity wise. So if there is any deviation where control is failing, where PO is not approved, right, where PR or POPR is created without any prior checking that material is there or not. So in case any of the deviation is there in the controls, in any of the controls there is any deviation, then whether is that deviation in our tolerable limit for us to pass this control. We can't simply fail the control based on one failure. We can't fail the control on based on one failure, right? We selected the sample, and even if there are certain cases of failure, 4 5 times it has failed, the control has failed, however on all other times it has passed, then we can't simply fail the controls. Getting this? So our tolerable rate of deviation is the kind of our tolerable rate by we are by which how much you can tolerate the deviation, how much deviation you can tolerate as an auditor for you to pass the control and not to fail it actually. So that is a kind of tolerable rate of deviation from prescribed internal control procedure set by the auditor, in respect of which auditor seeks to obtain an appropriate level of assurance that the rate of deviation set by the auditor is not exceeded by the actual rate of deviation. So my actual rate of deviation would be suppose 5%, then tolerable rate of deviation would be less than 5%. Why? Because of the same line. That is why how we perform performance materiality. Do you remember? Total materiality से कम रखना है. The total materiality, if it is at 1 crore, then performance materiality will be at 70 lakhs, 60 lakhs. Similarly, if it is tolerable rate of deviation, my actual deviation which I can tolerate is 5%, then my tolerable rate of deviation will be less than 5%, because I have to also provide for undetected misstatement, right? Undetected deviations, or you can say because of the sampling, so that overall if I combine aggregatively, it should not exceed my actual rate of deviation which I can tolerate. ठीक है?
सर मेनली ये हमारे इंटरनल कंट्रोल से रिलेटेड होता है। टॉलरेबल मिस स्टेटमेंट वो
It
डिफर हो
could
गया
be
और ये
any, it could be rate of deviation could be like anywhere, even if suppose example, like I told you, in the PO the quantity will be there, right? And it should tally it with PR quantity. Mainly system does have a control where it says that if PR make 100 tons hai, 100 tons quantity is there, 100 tons, then in PO it should automatically reflect as 100. It should not be 101 or 102. But sometimes you could back in the back of the system, you could enable, or you could enable the deviation up to, suppose, say 2%. Up to 2% you can enable the deviation. That means 102 or 98 will be allowed. So in that case, a rate of deviation which is tolerable, right? Tolerable rate of deviation, which is tolerable by the entity itself, and thereby we as a process evaluated the process of the entity, and if we are comfortable, we will be comfortable with this tolerable rate of deviation. But if not, if there is no known rate of deviation, that means this should be 100 only in accordance with the entity, then we as an auditor can also have our own tolerable rate of deviation. That fine, if it's 100, then it should automatically populate as 100. However, if they have manually filled it as 101 or 102, then that is also fine with us. We won't fail the control. It, you can say, is more or less related to internal controls also, more or less related to process also. The difference could be there in the process and internal control. Tolerable rate of deviation, you want to pass the control or fail the control. Similarly, you want to pass the audit procedure, or you want to then again increase your sampling. If suppose you came across certain deviation or misstatement, but that misstatement is limit within your tolerable limit, then you will not increase the sampling further, right? But if it is exceeding this tolerable misstatements, then you will have to increase the sampling. Right?
Right, sir.
And what you were saying is also correct, that tolerable rate of deviation is very much related to test of controls, and tolerable misstatement you can relate to test of details of transaction. Because misstatements we can find in where we are checking the transaction in details, right? Where we are actually finding the misstatements. However, deviation we generally find in controls, that the controls were not properly operating effectively. There were some deviation in few other circumstances in the controls. So remember, this tolerable rate of deviation relates more to the TOC, whereas tolerable misstatement relates more to the TOD. This has also been asked in MCQ, if I recall. ICA के MCQ में you will find this. ICA के MCQ में tolerable rate of deviation relates to TOD. They will give you in one option. They will give you relates to TOD, and tolerable misstatement relates to TOC. They will give. Similarly, they will try to make the combination that both are related to TOD, both are related to TOC, or tolerable rate of deviation relate to TOC. However, tolerable misstatement relate to TOD. The last option you will have to tick. Clear? Yes or no? Sony. Everyone.
Yes, sir. Clear.
Now come to evaluating results of audit sampling. Now once you have performed the sampling, now the auditor will evaluate the results, right? What the sampling results has come. Now he'll evaluate the result and then accordingly determine that whether the sampling used at the sampling that he has done, that has provided or not a reasonable basis for concluding his audit opinion. That means, can he rely on those sample procedures that he had performed, and his opinion, can he form his opinion? Audit opinion can be formed or not based on the sampling procedure that he has carried out. So that is what you have to evaluate now. After performing the sampling, you have to now evaluate the results of sampling. That whether can we perform our whether can we have our opinion, audit opinion, on basis this sampling procedure. And if error or misstatement is identified, then auditor will have to then investigate its nature of the error, cause of the error, evaluate their possible effect on the purpose of the audit procedure and other areas. And lastly, in analyzing the deviation and misstatement identified, auditor would also need to consider the qualitative aspect and not just quantitative aspect. So they have asked from here, see the in depth, how much in depth you have to go through. They have asked from this third point, they have framed a question, and then you will have to write all the 4 points. Last questions you can see here. Last question. An auditor, while analyzing the errors in a sample, need not consider the qualitative aspects of error detected. You have to comment. Now you have to remember that, okay, fine, this line we read in the results evaluation of the sampling, evaluating the results of the sampling. This line we read there in that topic, and therefore that topic has to be written here as an answer. You'll say that no, it is incorrect, and then you have to write evaluating the results of audit sampling, complete evaluation of audit sampling results. Getting this? And now generally you will find that auditor will observe, see, in the last point what they say, that you will observe that many a time you have a common feature. For example, the type of transaction, location, product line, or period of item. So you will find that generally there are deviations or misstatements that you are trying to find, or you found certain misstatement in the sampling, and you find that generally it relates to central region, or generally it relates to the month end or month beginning, or year end, year beginning. So generally it has a common feature. The type of transaction will find a common type of transaction, or location, or product, or line, or period of time. And therefore in those circumstances auditor may decide to identify those, all those items in that year end, अप्रैल मंथ बिगिनिंग में सारे सारे आइटम सैंपल कर लो, पूरा नो सैम्पलिंग, चेक ऑल द आइटम्स. Getting this, where you find that okay, the most region, like the most misstatement I found is in northern region, my branches in northern region, so I'll check all the items in the northern branches. So that you can do by performing sampling and then analyzing the results of sampling based on certain common features you have to evaluate. Clear? So this answer can be asked. This has not yet been asked, but evaluating the results of audit sampling, MTP question is there. Go through 4 points again, and then we'll start with what sampling selection methods. Now come to sample selection method. Now how will you select samples? So there are 5 methods of sampling they have given to you. 5 methods of sampling they have given to you: random selection, systematic selection, haphazard selection, block sampling, monetary unit sampling. So let's first finish off first and last. Random selection is very simple. It's kind of same, that is statistical sampling, use of probability theory, more scientific, use of probability theory, rand function. Then equal chance of getting selected. Everyone is getting equal chance of being selected. Random number table, use of random number tables. The sampling units could be physical items such as sales, invoice, or monetary units. This method is considered appropriate provided the population to be sampled consists of reasonably similar units and falls within a reasonable range. So similar units, if you are having similar units, then you can do this what, random selection. But in case of having heterogeneous units, then we'll see different method. Last one is very simple also, that it is based on value weighted selection. So it's kind of, you can link it to stratification, sorry. You can link to stratification. The more the value, the more chances it should have to the sampling should be more. The more the value is there for the transaction, the sampling should be more. And then systematic selection. So here what do we do? For systematic selection, we decide a number of sampling units in a population, in now divided by the sample size. So number of sampling units in the population is divided by sample size. Example I am saying, suppose there are 250 items in a population. Okay, if there are 250 items in a population, now it is in the population, it is divided by the sample size. Sample size, suppose, what do you mean by sample size? Out of 250, suppose I have to select 5 samples only. So I will not be completely checking the entire all 250 items. I will be checking only 5 out of 250 items. So what is my sample size? 5. So I'll divide 250 by 5. That is 250 my population, and 5 being my sample size. I'll get what, 50. I'll get what, 50, right? So now every 50th unit I'll select. So I'll select, suppose, first unit, then again I'll select what, 51st invoice number, then 101st, then 151st, and then lastly 201st. So first item 51st, 101st, 150, 100, and then 201st item I'll select as for my sample. The first item that you select could be any random number, first, second, third, fourth. If you select fifth, then the next item you will select is 55th, then again 105th, 155th, 205th. Similarly, if you select 10th item, then 110th, sorry, 60, 110, 160, 210. So the first item that you select could be random. However, after that you have to follow a systematic sampling. That is 5 sample you have to select on an interval of 50. On an interval of 50. And how do we arrive at a 50 interval? We arrived interval of 50 by dividing the total population by sample size. Clear? That is what your That is what your systematic sampling is, systematic selection. You can just read this once, you will get to know. Any doubt, let me know right now only. So number of sampling unit divided by sample size will give you what? Sampling interval. Interval they have given you. Now first select randomly select any first sampling unit, and from there on systematically derive the next sampling units after each sampling interval. Clear? Although the startup point may be determined haphazardly, I told you what, it could be random. The starting point, first, second, third, fourth, doesn't matter. It could be random. The sample is more likely to be truly random if it is determined by using the computerized random number table. That means what they are saying, that do not use your biased opinion. From 1 to 50, I should use first, I should use 50th item. No, simply select random number tables, and then that would be even more reliable or more unbiased. If you are selecting haphazardly for first 50 items, you can select using random number tables, or randomly you can select anything, but it should not be biased. Clear or not? It is any sort of technique which does not involve any scientific technique. It involves judgmental factors also. However, we should avoid being judgmental, we should avoid being getting biased, we should be objective. So without following a structured technique, avoid any conscious bias. You should not be consciously, being non-objective. You should try to avoid any conscious bias. You should try to avoid any sort of predictability. So suppose I tend to have a certain thought, of my thought process is like kind of that. I generally find entities doing misstatements or doing some sort of manipulation in the first or last transaction. Either they will do in first transaction, or either they will do in last transaction. At this mentality I have thought, because I feel that entity will think that auditor will not pick up first and last. They will pick up few items in between. Let's do it in first and last item. So entity will try to manipulate first or last item. And now me as an auditor have developed this thought process. But this thought process should be avoided. Any sort of biasness should be avoided. Any sort of predictability should be avoided. That is what they are saying. Getting this? So for example, avoiding difficult to locate items, or always choosing or avoiding the first or last entries. So I am avoiding always first and last entry, then I should not avoid like that. If I am always choosing first and last entry, then also it should not happen like that. Similarly, first example, I am always finding difficult to locate few items, then I am ignoring those items. It should not happen like that. If I am unable to locate, then I should try first and then clearly pick out the samples based on all the items, and simply cannot ignore the items which are difficult to locate. So in a way, you should not be biased, you should not be predictable. That is what they are saying, even in the haphazard selection. Getting this? And this is not appropriate when using the statistical sampling. Haphazard selection is not appropriate when you are using statistical sampling, because both are different. Statistical is based on probability theory, based on random number of tables, scientific method. Everyone is getting equal chance of being getting selected. Haphazard is haphazard, right? No structured technique. And now comes what? Block sampling. So block sampling generally involve what? You will select a block of transaction. You'll select a block of transaction. So suppose 21st to 51st, 21st to or 50th item, you have selected a block. Similarly, 251st to 300 item, you selected a block. And then lastly, 1500 to 2000. This is another block that you have created. So selection of block of contiguous item from within the population. From within the population, you have bifurcated into blocks. Now block selection cannot ordinarily be used in audit sampling, because most population are structured such that items in a sequence can be expected to have similar characteristics to each other, but different characteristics from items elsewhere in the population. They are actually going against block sampling by stating that, okay, all the items which are coming in here is sequentially could be similar to each other and could be different from this, right? Or could be different amongst each other. There is no fixed pattern. There is no fixed pattern. Such item that items in a sequence, in a block, under a block, in a sequence, items from 251st to 300 can be expected to have a similar characteristics, right? Maybe that items from 251 to 300, they all are a kind of same nature of transaction. It could happen, yes, definitely, to each other. but could be different characteristics from item elsewhere in the population. This transaction could be of similar nature, and this both the transaction in first block and the second block, the characteristics could be different for each transaction, right? So in some circumstances, it may be an appropriate audit procedure to examine a block of items. It would rarely be an appropriate sample selection technique when the auditor intends to draw valid inferences about the entire population based on these samples. So they are saying that okay, fine, if you are doing it in certain circumstances, appropriate audit procedure to examine a block of items, but it would not be appropriate all the time. It would not be appropriate all the time. That means here we do what? In the case of block sampling, we selected few blocks and we'll perform audit procedure in the entire block. We'll not select any now sampling. We'll simply perform the audit procedure in the entire block, or we can do few sampling in the block itself, but we'll not check items in between two blocks. We'll not check items in between two blocks. We'll check items on a block basis. Block we will select and we'll apply our sampling procedure on the entire block. Getting this? Block sampling. So they are not in favor of it mostly. They are saying that rarely it is used, rarely it can give you an appropriate audit opinion, or rarely it will be appropriate when the auditor intends to draw valid references about the entire population based on the sample. It would rarely be an appropriate sample selection technique. Everyone clear? Any doubt in the methods of selection of sampling? Question generally is asked is principal methods of selection or correction samples. Yeah, Sony.
So what is contagious items?
Contagious item means what? Which you can say is kind of similar in nature or which could spread. You can say na contagious disease. Contagious disease is what? Which can spread. So contagious item is having kind of similar characteristics elsewhere, just beside you. So contagious means having similar characteristics beside you as well.
Okay, sir.
So block of contagious item. We are selecting a block of sequential items. Not like here one. These are not. The block will be selected and the entire block will be then the sampling procedure will be applied on the entire block. Please go through that again. 5 methods of sampling, very important for exam point of view. They can ask you in MCQ. ठीक है? Now in case of test of control, you will have to tell me fatafat say whether we should increase our sample or decrease our sample. That these are all what? Factors which are affecting the sample size. So you'll have to quickly tell me factors which are affecting the sample size. An increase in the extent, an increase in the extent to which the auditor's risk assessment takes into account relevant controls. Bolo, what do you think? Hmm? An increase in the extent to which auditor's risk assessment takes into account relevant controls. That means what? Now you have increased your extent of risk assessment for your relevant controls. Are you getting this? An increase in the extent to which the auditor's risk assessment takes into account relevant controls. Now you perform risk assessment procedure and now you tend to find that the relevant controls assessment by which we have done the control testing or control assessment, it has to be increased. Extent has to be increased. An increase in the extent to which the auditor's risk assessment takes into account relevant controls. Because of inherent risk, you might have found certain inherent risk, business risk, because of which you find that our controls evaluation should increase. The extent to which we will apply our risk assessment procedure should increase. So should you increase your sample size or not? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes, right? So extent you have to increase, then definitely you have to increase the sampling size. Correct, Dhanlakshmi? रिस्क बढ़ गया, सैम्पलिंग बढ़ने की. Then increase in the tolerable rate of deviation. Increase in the tolerable rate of deviation. So earlier your tolerable rate of deviation was 5% and now it has come to 7%. Whether you will increase the sample size or not. Yes or no, everyone?
No, sir.
No, everyone? Everyone, yes or no? Nupur, Nikita? Yeah. So the tolerable rate of deviation has now increased. So we can reduce our sample size, right? We can reduce our sample size even if there are few more deviations, that will also work. An increase in the expected rate of deviation to be tested. Population to be tested. Now there is an increase in the expected rate of deviation. What do you think? Sampling will increase or decrease? Nupur is saying increase.
Yes, sir. Increase.
Everyone is saying increase. Dhanlakshmi Puja. Correct. So now since you expect the rate of deviation is already high, then you will then definitely increase your sample size. And lastly, increase in the auditor's desired level of assurance that the tolerable rate of deviation is not exceeded by the actual rate of deviation. Now you want that my tolerable rate of deviation should not exceed the actual rate of deviation. Your desired level of assurance has increased. The level of assurance that you want has now increased. Whether the sampling will increase or decrease, the level of assurance that you want has now increased.
Increase, sir.
Everyone increase, right? So it's more or less simple. Similarly, we can see select correctly on this other lines as well. An increase in the auditor's assessment of ROMM. So ROMM assessment has increased, therefore sampling will increase, right? Similarly, increase in the use of other substantive procedure directed at the same assertion. Now they are saying that increase in the use of other substantive procedure directed at the same assertion. Directed at the same assertion. So other substantive procedure you have started performing TOD more, suppose example. Test of detail you are performing, or suppose example you are performing analytical procedure. So whether you will be performing TOD more or less, just think in those lines. If suppose you are performing other substantive procedure may you are sampling or analytical procedure also come, right? So suppose you perform analytical procedure much more. So whether you will perform now TOD more or less,
Less, sir.
less, right? So sampling could be less. Similarly, auditor increase in the auditor's desired level of assurance that tolerable misstatement is not exceeded. Now again, assurance level has increased. Expected desired level of assurance is increased. So we will increase our sample size. Increase in tolerable misstatement, therefore we will decrease the sample size. Increase in the amount of misstatement the auditor expects to find. So we will again expected rate of misstatement, then we will have to increase, and stratification of population when appropriate. So stratified sampling you are doing. So generally sampling will then fall in the cases where stratification, generally you will find that when you are performing like without stratification, if you are doing the audit, so you will tend to pick up more samples as compared to after stratification, because after stratification you will tend to select only few items from those category where 1 to 25,000 was there, 25,000 to 1 lakh was there, 1 lakh to 2 lakh, 2 lakh to 5 lakh, 5 lakh to 10 lakh. So the proportion will initially are less, right, as compared to the proportion in the later parts of the stratification, in the later stratas. So you'll find that stratification will tend to decrease your audit sampling. We have done the audit sampling. Go through the question answer again. This is an important question. This is an RTP November 2022 question. Please go through the same. We will meet tomorrow. I'll let you know about the timing for tomorrow, Saturday. Test, remember the test for chapter 3 and chapter 4. फटाफट से रिवाइज करो क्विकली एंड गिव द टेस्ट प्रॉपरली. ठीक है.
सर प्लीज टाइमिंग 3 बजे के आसपास रखिएगा ना, अगर सेकेंड हाफ रख रहे हैं तो.
या आई लेट यू नो. मोस्टली इट विल बी इन इवनिंग 3 or 4. डोंट वरी.
ओके.
ठीक है.